From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Here's what's ahead. During this week's cattle market segment, Lee Schulz of Iowa State University will talk about the current struggles in the cash-fed cattle market, and he'll look at how last week's USDA report on corn acreage might influence decisions on early weaning calves. Then from the latest Cattle Chat podcast out of the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State. Considerations for you cattle producers about direct marketing beef to local or regional customers. Today's Kansas Wheat Harvest Update features Extension Agricultural Agent Rebecca Zack of the River Valley Extension District. And on this week's 4-H segment, Jeff Wickman talks with K-State's Anissa Jepsen about the 4-H shooting sports program. All that here on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Keeping your distance from others is important in slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are some fun things to do alone. Read a book, take a walk, unpack your suitcase from that trip you took last September, paint a self-portrait, catch up on a TV series, do a puzzle. Remember, we should all stay home to lower the risk for everyone. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
This is the K-State Radio Network, and once again, thanks for being along with us for Agriculture Today. To the cattle markets as we come out of this holiday weekend, and talking with us now is a livestock economist from Iowa State University, Lee Schulz. Lee, we've quite an array of things to get into here today, but let's start with, as usual, the cash-fed cattle trade. Another disappointing week last week. Prices seem to be sort of stuck in the mud right now on the cash side.
Certainly have been. Live prices, we've been in that 93 to 98 range, mostly about 95. Dress prices at 153 to 156, and really 153 to 155 is where we've been trading. And a tremendous mismatch, really, when you look across futures. They continue to really discount bearish news. You can really point to the most recent acreage report with reduction in corn acres. Really, cattle futures were up, right? When you looked across this week, especially when you look at the August and August contracts in both live cattle and feeder cattle. So I think there's some continued thought that at some point these markets have to a bit rectify. And if it's that continued slide in that front month futures contracts, I think we're going to really continue to watch that August contract for live cattle from really some sense of optimism or lack of optimism. You know, I think some of the hope is we get a bounce in cash prices, but realizing that the fundamentals there for cash are really pointing to that backlog of cattle, which I got estimated at roughly 1.1 million head. And that's easy to calculate. That's the slaughter decline compared to year ago levels. And so until that's cleaned up, I think that's really weighing on those cash prices.
On the demand side, boxed beef prices, once more, the last several weeks have been, some say it's a correction, others say it's just been a real difficult time for boxed beef trade. But is that market about to find its low ebb at some point here, Lee?
When you look at the time of year, we are entering the dog days of summer. So this is always a tough time for beef prices in general, and we're going to go post-holiday here, the 4th of July. And so, I think we expected to enter some waning times. One thing that I continue to look at is actually choice prices are about $13 lower than they were this same time last year. Select prices are actually a little bit higher, about $1.50. Well, you can really rationalize that pretty easy as we've had this backlog of cattle. They are heavy cattle. That's bringing more beef, but it's also bringing a lot more prime and choice beef. So that's really pressured, especially currently, that choice cutout relative to the select cutout. Now, I think it's really going to depend on how well the individual items of that box do over the next couple of months. And that's a real difficult question to answer, as we've seen many states have kind of reversed the business reopening guidance that they've had. And so we've seen some more restrictions on food service. So how does that impact the high-end steaks that are already impacted in these dog days of summer relative to some of the other cuts in the grind that we do see in the market?
On the demand side as well, Lee, and it's more of just a broad observation here concerning the official implementation now of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement that kicked in this past Wednesday, the 1st of July. This has always been touted ever since its inception as good news for the cattle sector, and there's no reason to think otherwise, is there?
There's not, but also it's going to take time, right? So we have the date of effective implementation, but realizing that this implementation is going to occur over the next several weeks and months, and so we're not going to see an immediate impact from this. Now, when we look at the most recent trade data from Mexico, accumulated exports were down compared to year-ago levels, about 28%. Now, that's because last year was a pretty good year for exports, and so that's just going to give us a little bit lower number. Also realizing that prices have been much higher in the last several months, and that's impacting trade volumes. Mexico, from a beef standpoint, is up 11% in those accumulated exports. And so, yes, we expect more product to flow to those countries. But again, it's going to take time, and still the fundamentals are going to impact that. So this is going to help with that trade, but higher prices will impact that. Availability issues will impact that. We just hope a lot of that's behind us, and we can see the ramp up in that trade.
Want to take on a couple of other topics here, one of which you alluded to earlier, and that is that USDA crop production report out this past week. The stem winder there, if you will, out of those numbers was the USDA's corn acreage, much lower than anybody had anticipated. That gave corn prices a big boost, but that, in turn, relates to the cost of gain for feeding cattle as we move forward here. How would you interpret that impact, Lee?
Well, certainly the most recent report, just the news of it, was rather supportive of the market. And I think the market will kind of figure out and discount or take it at full credit over the next several weeks. So we'll see where that also settles out. Weather's obviously going to have an impact on where corn prices are. If that number is true, we still are going to have adequate supplies of feed. And still, I think, relatively low feed costs, at least when we take it in the grand scheme of things. As that impacts cattle feeding, I don't think it's going to impact placements all that much. It may have some implications for some backgrounding as we get into the fall. Those margins were already pretty tight. And so there may be on the margin, again, some impacts there. I will highlight with the backgrounding, maybe weaning calves early and backgrounding, that still may be an opportunity, even though those margins are rather tight, as the futures market suggests, because this is a year we want a lot of flexibility. And so by holding on to those calves, that may provide for stronger markets a couple months down the road. Again, if we can get post backlog of cattle, which is certainly weighing on the markets, that should help see some appreciation in the whole cattle complex. So I think this is a year, if you have the resources, if you have the labor to do it, it's a year to maybe background those calves, even though the economics say it's a pretty tight margin right now.
Speaking of early weaning, which may be a product of dry and even drought conditions in a lot of places around and about, the prospect of not only early weaning those calves, but culling cows at an accelerated rate given dry pasture conditions. Are you hearing anything about that? And is that likely to have some sort of influence on our available beef volume?
Well, I think this year, probably beyond any that I've seen, is we're really seeing some regional impacts. And this is twofold. I think it's the drought, as you mentioned. We're having the West is dealing with a lot drier conditions than the East and even parts here in the Midwest. But also, there's this dynamic between cull cow prices are actually pretty good because ground beef demand has been so strong. So there's some incentive to cull animals, but also we've had the processing challenges. So if you look at the weekly data, this last week we were up about 13% compared to a year ago, but that's driven very much by the West. If you look at the California region, Arizona, they're up over 100% compared to a year ago when we just look at that weekly. Compare that to the Midwest here with Iowa, Kansas, we're at about par compared to a year ago levels. And so I think you're going to see some real regional divergence in some of those culling rates, which will have implications for those cow inventories and resulting beef production.
But that might not be an enormous impact in overall beef production, will it?
No, I don't think so. When you look at, our estimates right now are a lot of that beef production, just the timing of it got changed. So a lot of that second quarter production got shifted into third quarter, and I think some of that third quarter is going to get shifted into fourth quarter. And so estimates that I've seen are for greater beef production in 2021 than in 2020. And so you're going to see that twofold. I think inventories likely aren't going to change all that much, and so we're going to stay at these rather large levels. If we do see a ramp up in heifer slaughter, that's going to contribute to more of that beef supply. And so I think really the beef supplies are relatively assured. It's just the timing of that beef was dictated a little bit by what we experienced in May.
All right. And one last thing here, Lee, and it might have gone overlooked from that overall USDA report, which came out again last week, but there was a posting on hay acreage. That number is always of interest to cattle producers as we look forward to the need for hay further on. Anything of interest that was put out there?
Inventories are rather large in historical landscape. When you looked at the March prospective plantings, they were expecting about 850,000 more acres nationally planted. That was up about 2%. But when you look at the acreage report here this last week, it was actually, they took all of that away. So really acreage is going to be at par with year-ago levels. So expectations from a pricing standpoint is, I don't think we're going to see much weaker prices when it comes to hay, especially as some regions are dealing with drought. And that's really, I think, going to put a limit on, how much cheaper our feed costs are going to be in a year that, I think is going to be really important to profitability as calf prices are not going to be all that much higher or could be lower than we've seen last year.
Well, a number of considerations we've gone over here today, Lee. Thanks for your time and the comments, and we'll catch up with you again in a few weeks from now.
Thank you.
He's Lee Schulz, livestock economist out of Iowa State University, here on Agriculture Today.
Kansas farmers and ranchers are helping feed your family in the world. The largest contributor to the Kansas economy is beef cattle. How do you get that juicy steak on your plate? In order for you to enjoy your tasty meal, it requires the hard work of the producers, marketers, advertisers, processors, inspectors, transporters, packers, and consumers. So thank all these people and sit back, relax, and enjoy your tasty meal.
Agriculture Today is back now, and time to hear again from the team at the K-State Beef Cattle Institute. They've put together another BCI Cattle Chat podcast, during which they offered several details for you cattle producers to consider if one's thinking about direct marketing beef to local or regional customers. That's more involved than you might think. And further ahead, they'll address the question of when to pull the bulls to conclude this breeding season. Here are cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber, livestock economist Dustin Pendell, and veterinarians Bob Larson, and your moderator, Brad White.
A lot of people have looked at doing direct beef marketing. Many of us have been around folks for years who would buy a half a beef or buy freezer beef from somebody. But now this is a little bit different. This is actually talking about going direct to consumers, direct from the ranch. And there's some real pros in getting that communication going. There's also some cons of this type of system. So I want to pose to you guys, you three all have different perspectives on this. If you were thinking about, if you're a rancher thinking about direct marketing to consumers, what are some of the things you want to think about?
I've got a good friend that actually does this and has been doing this for a number of years. And so I've talked to him about some of the challenges. One is finding customers, meeting their needs. Sometimes their initial thought is that maybe this will be less expensive, and it usually isn't. But, just really finding the consumers and making sure that you, the producer, and the consumer are agreeing on really what are some of the benefits of this interaction.
And that there are enough consumers, right? So a very few people that are very vocal that they want to buy directly from you may not sustain it as a business, right? I think that's part of what you're saying too, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard work to find the people that are going to be, repeat customers. And because if I'm going to invest this much time to kind of set up this relationship, I'd sure like them to buy more than one time.
Weber, what are some of your thoughts?
Well, I think, one of the big challenges is, making sure that you comply. I know there's some varying rules on, and I don't have the skinny on all of them, of course, but the varying inspection regulations and to sell beef direct to consumers, what those might be. So you might check with your university meats extension group. They can probably point you the right way, and your locker plant can probably aid in that as well. The other thing is pricing. So getting a good idea of if you're going to sell by the cut or quarters or halves of beef, what's a fair market price for those products. And I don't see it too often, but once in a while people kind of underprice their product. And so make sure you have an understanding of how to price the product. So part of that business plan idea.
Yeah, I think pricing the product and it's not just parts of the product, right? So when you buy a half beef, it's pretty easy. You sell 2 half beefs, you sold the whole thing, right? I can do that math. But if you start selling it by specific products, so if I'm selling steaks versus roasts versus rounds versus anything else, I've got to have a little bit different strategy, and I've got to be able to price that stuff accordingly. Is that part of what you're thinking there?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. So if I sell half a beef to somebody and they got to pay the processing charges and they get it cut up however they want, they get all the yield off of that. But if I got to sell the strip loin or the steaks out of rib steaks or loin steaks, piecemeal it out, well, that changes the pricing model substantially and makes it quite a bit more complex. So,
because carcass utilization is something that you hear people talk about as one of the efficiency drivers in the packing industry.
Yep.
If you go this approach and you're direct going to consumers with individual cuts, you're a part of that now, right? If you go to freezer beef, your carcass utilization is assured because I sold you half a beef. You do what you want with it. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and finding a home for the less desirable bits can be a real challenge and frankly can make or break the deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's where your margin is, right?
Yep, for sure.
Dustin, what do you, so we're throwing out economic terms here like we know what they mean, but you probably have a perspective.
There's a lot of things I think one needs to consider, and I think Bob have hit on a lot of them, but I was just thinking some of the processing considerations. There's processing schedules. I've heard some crazy times being listed, months out. Beef cut options, as Bob mentioned, processing costs. So thinking about this economics, what are the costs of it? And then on the flip side, on the revenue side, thinking about some of the marketing considerations. Generally beef producers, cattle producers, they don't do direct sales. So that's going to be something that's different to them. They're going to have to learn. They're going to have to figure all that out. Communication. Have those, for the cattle that they're selling, the beef that they're selling, have those calves been on the farm the entire time? If they have, is that farm of origin? So can they make a premium off that? How much might those customers be willing to pay? And have they treated them with antibiotics? Are they grass-fed? So there's a lot of things that I think one could think about from the economic side on marketing, from the revenue, but also you need to think about the cost side as well. So there's a lot of things I think one needs to look about. But the good news is there are a number of university extension websites, Iowa State, Mississippi State. I know I've seen some stuff on this direct marketing of cattle. So do your homework, need to be educated before one ventures into this, because there's a lot of things that information one needs to know before doing it.
And Dustin, part of what I heard you say though is, yes, figure out the economic part of your plan. And then I'm going to kind of tie in some of the stuff that Bob and Bob said earlier. You got to communicate with those customers. You also have to have a plan for how am I maybe going to provide some education as to this is how we raise the beef and this is what it means when we do it this way. Last topic I wanted to talk about today And Weber, I want to ask you, when should I pull the bull out of the breeding pasture? So I turned him out, start of the breeding season. A lot of times people will talk about a 60, 90-day breeding season. Should I pull him out at the end of 90 days, or can I leave him in? Because sometimes that 60, 90 days is mid-July and it's hot.
Yeah, great question, and one that many producers start to think about this time of year, because maybe it's the bulls are running out of work, and so they're getting a little annoying if they're jumping fences and that kind of stuff. But the reality is and I've sort of changed my sort of philosophy on real short breeding seasons. What I really want is a real short calving season. What I don't want is a bunch of open cows in the fall created by managerial induced openness because I pulled the bulls out. And so actually leaving bulls with cows for a fairly extended period of time makes some sense. We know that bred cows in the fall, even if they're late bred, are worth a lot more than an open cow.
So even if they don't fit my herd, they might fit somebody else.
They might fit somebody else's, exactly. So bred cows is the objective, even if they're potentially late bred. And so that means, sometimes leaving bulls out substantially longer than a 60 or a 90-day breeding season. We have to use some other methodology to determine which cows we're going to keep then, right? So probably an ultrasound pregnancy diagnosis is the most reliable in terms of fetal aging, and getting that done at an appropriate time point is really critical to that process.
One more critical thing for that process is the discipline to do it, because I've done this before, and then you get in and you say, well, I'm not going to keep him if she's late pregnant, but then she's pregnant later than everybody else, but I kind of like her.
She's my favorite cow. Yeah.
Maybe I'll get one more calf out of her. So you have to be sure that you've got some system in place that you're still happy to sell those. Otherwise, it does spread out your calving season.
Yeah, for sure. The other time, though, to think about pulling bulls and a system I think can work fairly well for folks is, if I rely very heavily on yearling bulls to cover cows, making sure that we've got both an appropriate bull to cow ratio. So rule of thumb is a cow for every month of age for between a yearling and a 2-year-old bull. So if he's 15 months old at turnout, he gets 15 cows. But not for 150 days breeding season. He gets 15 cows for 45 days or maybe 60 days on the outside. Yeah. Those yearling bulls are still trying to grow. They'll lose a lot of body condition potentially, as they go out and try and settle cows, and that creates a fertility issue as well. So having either, if you're a small producer and you rely on kind of a one bull breeding pasture and you're using yearlings, probably better turn 2 if you've got 30 or 40 cows. But do those in a rotation so that after 45 days or 60 days you can pull one bull and turn out the other bull. If you've got bigger breeding pastures with multiple bulls, you need to think about building cohorts of bulls so that you don't turn in a group of bulls that haven't been pastured and reared together, if you will. So they've got all their tussles sorted out before they go start breeding cows, because for a few days they'll work on figuring out who's boss instead of breeding cows, and you don't want that. So, and risk injury and so forth.
From the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University, Brad White, Bob Weber, Bob Larson, and Dustin Pendell. KSUBCI.org is where you'll find the podcast in its entirety. That's the Beef Cattle Institute website, KSUBCI.org. Now this break. When we come back, today's Kansas wheat harvest report for you. And more, so stay with us. This is Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. We're back now on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson with you. And we continue on now with our daily wheat harvest updates from around Kansas as the harvest is starting to draw to a close in many locations, but not quite so in far north central Kansas, and specifically the River Valley Extension District. That is comprised of Clay, Cloud, Washington, and Republic counties. We're visiting with the Extension crop production agent serving that district, Rebecca Zach now. Rebecca, just how far along have you seen harvest progress in your area up there?
Yeah, so in the South counties, they started about a week and a half ago, and Washington and Republic kind of just got started last week. Probably in Cloud and Clay, they're about halfway through, and then Washington and Republic, maybe 25% done.
So a ways to go yet.
Oh, yeah.
But the hot weather will help push that along. What were the expectations for the crop in that four-county area going in when you consider things like the late freeze in the spring and other conditions?
So luckily we weren't as far along in the spring for that frost to really affect us that much. We're averaging about 40 in all four counties. Some a little bit higher in, especially the southern counties, maybe closer to 50, but definitely 40 in the top two. 40
to 50 bushel wheat, that sounds relatively good, considering all.
Yeah, we're actually pretty close to what the wheat tour was predicting.
How about diseases? Were diseases much of an impediment to wheat in that area?
Oh, not too much. Some fields had a lot of tan spot in there, so they might be a little bit lower this year, but overall not too bad.
So are producers fairly, as you've talked with a few, are they fairly content with what's been going on as far as the harvest to this moment anyway?
Yeah, I think I guess this year we didn't have too much wheat in, a little less than other years, but the guys who did put some in seem like they're having a good harvest.
Well, Rebecca, thank you for a quick summary of what's been going on in the River Valley District. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
She's Rebecca Zach, and she is the Extension crop production agent for the River Valley Extension District, which is in north central Kansas, Clay, Cloud, Washington, and Republic counties. More harvest information for you, thanks to our good friends at Kansas Wheat in Mitchell County. Those rainfall events in the latter part of June, 3 to 7 inches of rain in that part of Mitchell County, forcing harvest out until the fields were able to dry out. The reports are that producers are now back in the fields, harvesting in full swing and hopes to be done by this weekend with protein levels from 11.5 to 12.4%. That's below last year, and the crop there was slow to mature. Tomorrow we'll talk with Post Rock Extension District agent Sandra Wick about more harvest progress information in that area. Further west in Trego County, yields averaging around 40 bushels per acre, but ranging from 20 to 60. Protein around 12%, ranging as low as 9% to as high as 15%. That area, Trego County, about halfway done with harvest and should be complete in about a week. This reminder for you producers, registration now open for that webinar that'll help beef cattle operators prepare to manage and reduce the impacts of drought and reduced forage availability on cow herds. This will be hosted by the K-State Department of Animal Sciences and Industry and Research and Extension via Zoom this Thursday noon. That's July the 9th. The webinar being conducted to help cow-calf producers evaluate the options to make strategic adjustments in response to the reduced forage availability expected. The program will feature a look at reduction of grazing pressure, drought supplementation of the cow herd, early weaned calf nutrition and management, and calf health considerations presented by members of the K-State Beef Extension team. Here's K-State Beef Systems Specialist Justin Wagner.
We're really trying to take, look at this from several different angles. Webinar is primarily going to involve myself, Sandy Johnson, and AJ Tarpoff. Some of the other topics we're going to be discussing will be what I call kind of the strategic reduction of grazing pressure, if you will, talking about some things like early pregnancy detection, how to find those females that are open. And then as we get into the early weaning side of things, that's one topic, talking about how we manage those calves, the nutrition of those calves, but also offer a little bit of information on drought supplementation. We know that, as I look at drought, I often think, drought is a game of grazing days, pounds of available forage, and cow body condition is really what we're trying to preserve. And so we'll talk about the cow supplementation side of things, how to, maybe put some extra additional condition on those cows through some tools like early weaning. Dr. Tarpoff's going to talk a little bit about the health management side of those early wean calves. A lot of times there's some concern with producers as we look at weaning those calves at anywhere from 100 to 120 days of age. We'll go through some of the data that's out there and just try to share some of our thoughts on how to do that. And really, especially with the market conditions that are out there, we need to be sensitive to the fact that we need those calves to perform if we do look at implementing some of these strategies.
K-State's Justin Wagner there, and producers, there is plenty of time to register for this webinar, but you do need to register. To do so, go to ksubeef.org, ksubeef.org, and the instructions for registering for the webinar are right there. If you'd rather, you can contact K-State's Lois Schreiner to take care of that registration. Lois's number is 785-532-1267, 785-532-1267. Again, though, take part in this webinar on managing the cow herd in times of drought. That'll take place this coming Thursday, straight up noon via Zoom. So take full advantage of that opportunity. And lastly, before the break, a quick news item. President Trump will be meeting with his Mexican counterpart, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, this Wednesday at the White House. They'll be celebrating the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement taking effect on July the 1st. The Canadian government has not confirmed whether Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will join the other two North American leaders in Washington. Meanwhile, the Office of U.S. Trade Representative has announced the individuals who sit on the dispute settlement panels to hear disputes brought on by governments under the pact. This week's 4-H segment is coming your way next. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Kansas 4-H youth participating in shooting sports have been able to compete in a Quiz Bowl competition and are resuming training in the various sports. Kansas 4-H Extension Specialist Anissa Jepsen discusses how shooting sports adapted to COVID-19, as well as the current plans for matches for this fall. Anissa, one of the things we wanted to cover today is some different news on your Facebook page.
Yes, that's right. We're really excited because we've expanded our 4-H shooting sports page to be called the Kansas 4-H Natural Resources page. This is super exciting because not only will we highlight the things that we've been doing in 4-H shooting sports in Kansas, but we're going to also talk about the other project areas that fall within the natural resources project areas. So this is a great opportunity to share experiences that your youth have as a county agent or as a family in the natural resource project area. And of course, always check out that page for information, all the goings on as things change with this crazy world we're in right now. That natural resources page is going to be the first stop.
I always think about wildlife and rocks. Is that part of natural resources?
Definitely wildlife, sport fishing, things like that. Our geology falls into natural resources too, but most of that information is still on our main page, but we'll probably be transitioning over to include anything that you think about in natural resources. It's just a great opportunity for those youth that are in one project area to kind of explore all the other areas that fall within those interests.
talking about shooting sports. They have been competing in the national shooting competition, but they've been doing it virtually, right?
That's right. So we have had the opportunity to do the National 4-H Shooting Sports Quiz Bowl. This has been a really exciting opportunity. Anyone that's in livestock or other project areas knows all about quiz bowls. This year, Auburn University, University of Arkansas, and Oregon State University put together the first ever virtual 4-H Shooting Sports Quiz Bowl. We had over 19 youth participate in junior, intermediate, and senior competition, and we'll be waiting for those results to be posted, and you'll be able to find those again on our Kansas 4-H Natural Resources page.
Nice to have so many participants involved.
Yes, I was really excited. The process was a little complicated just because it's something we haven't done, but of course, our Kansas youth and families were able to navigate that and participate, and I believe that it was a really good experience, and so we'll be looking for more of those opportunities coming up in the future.
And there would have been a big competition last week in Nebraska, but again, that had to be canceled as well.
Yeah, last week would have been our championship week. We always take teams up to Grand Island, Nebraska. This is something that our Shooting Sports Project area kids work for all year. We were really excited. We would have had 8 teams that would have participated. That's 31 youth. 8 coaches, 2 national coordinators, more family members than we can possibly count. And we're just really proud of all the work that they did do, those team members. The youth do a really great job, and they always make me really proud in Grand Island. So we're looking forward to next year.
I'm sure they're disappointed, but I'm also sure that they understood why this had to happen.
That's right. I think across the country, we've all been struggling with ways that we can adapt and overcome the challenges we faced. And, one good thing about our 4-H kids is they're resilient, and we'll handle the challenges that we face this year and come back stronger.
Now, coming up shortly, they will be able to start practicing again. Is that right?
Yeah. So the one thing about shooting sports is that we don't allow virtual practices just because of the safety issue. We always know that shooting sports is one of those project areas that's a little bit different than every other 4-H project area. But starting July 5th, they were able to go back to face-to-face with their instructors. So if you are a shooting sports instructor, if you're an agent, or if you're a youth or family, it's just really important that you contact those adults and get started back on your face-to-face. Before you participate in qualifiers for state matches, you need to have a certain number of hours in training or in practices, and so you would need to talk to your local unit, and your instructors can help you with those things.
What kind of steps are they taking to minimize risk?
It actually is a really great process that we have in place overall for 4-H. First of all, you need to be in contact with your local agent. As we know, every county is a little bit different in Kansas, and so you would need to contact them to see what the county health department has specified. We also do have overarching kind of best practices that we follow in conjunction with the CDC in the state of Kansas that all agents have. So our shooting sports volunteers just need to make sure that they're in contact with their counties and making sure that they're doing those things to keep those youth safe. We're a little, happier because a lot of the things that we do happen outside, so we are able to minimize risk a little bit more than if we were all inside. But still, our main goal is to keep the youth, the volunteers, and the spectators safe.
And there are 4 state matches planned for this coming session.
Yes, we're still on for the fall. So those qualifiers that will be happening this summer are to qualify for those matches. We have archery coming up September 26th in Lindsborg. Our hunting skills, muzzleloading, and small bore happens October 3rd in Topeka. Shotgun is October 10th and 11th by Wichita. And then we also have a Western Heritage that is in conjunction with Missouri, October 17th and 18th. So we have a busy fall ahead of us.
And all of that is on the website.
Yes, and then any information you would need for qualifying and things like that are all on the website, and you just need to talk with your local instructor and agent.
Another important aspect of shooting sports is instructors, and you have a training scheduled for November.
We do. So our spring training was canceled due to COVID, but we know the importance of getting those instructors in our local programs trained. You cannot lead any shooting sports activities without being a qualified instructor and a trained instructor. So as of now, we are planning a training November 7th and 8th in Cimarron. What we really need for you all to do is to contact your local agent if you're interested in being an instructor, because we are looking at interest to see if we do have enough volunteers that would be able to participate. It's really important to have those volunteers to be trained so that we can kick off the fall enrollment period and season with trained volunteers. So definitely check that out. Talk to your local agent, and they can contact us for any other questions that they might have.
Important to have several instructors because there's a lot of kids that participate in shooting sports.
That's right, and there are safety ratios that we need to follow. Again, shooting sports is really cool because we not only have our guidelines, but we also have an overreaching national guidelines that we follow. And we have an awesome program with awesome volunteers, and we just want to continue that work.
That's Kansas 4-H Extension Specialist Anissa Jepsen. For more information on shooting sports or natural resources, contact your county or district extension office or visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.